This is my 2003 Saab 9-3, and if you're new to the channel or aren't subscribed, I got this car painted by Maaco 4 years ago. Everyone knows Maaco as the cheap, affordable paint and body option for your car, so I want to talk about some of the pros and cons, my experience over the 4 years, how everything has held up, and if I'd recommend it. Let's get started. When you go to Maaco, there are a few different paint options that they give you. There's like the standard like 1 year paint job. Basically, people will only use that if they're flipping a car and they just want it to look good. That's like a $600-800 option. I went with a bit of a better option, especially by Maaco standards. It was still a single stage paint job, but it was a urethane with an integrated clear coat, and it has a 4-year prorated warranty. So it's 4 years, let's see how it still looks. So if you didn't see the original paint video, I will link it up in the top corner if you want to see more about how that experience was and just more about the actual paint job of the whole car, because it was really rough beforehand. I paid just about $1,500 for the original paint job, but that also included a little bit of body work, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But as you can see, it looks pretty good still. I have had some other stuff repainted. We'll talk about that here in a bit. But the car is not a showroom condition paint. Like, it's not, 12 out of 10, amazing. But for a Maaco job, the paint has held up very well, and this midnight blue just looks fantastic. So don't go into Maaco expecting to get a $10,000 paint job for $2,000, because of course that's not going to happen. And of course there are plenty of little imperfections with the paint. First off, being rock chips. Just living in Arizona, that sort of happens naturally over time, but especially my front lip down here has accumulated quite a few rock chips over the years, and one of which has even caused the paint to chip a decent bit. That's not really so much Maaco's fault. I'm sure if the car had an actual thick clear coat on it, that probably wouldn't have happened. Really, it's held up very well. And I should note, of course, that this car is parked inside pretty much as I can, so almost all the time. That is partially because of the Maaco paint job. I'm sure it is a very thick single coat, but I am a bit fearful that if I let this sit outside for 6 months, you might start to see some of the paint go. I don't necessarily think or know that would happen. That's just kind of me being overly cautious and taking advantage of being able to park it inside when I can. I didn't have any issues with Maaco in terms of like masking or other things like that. The only little spot I've found over the years is right here. There's like a strip of midnight blue, which I'm sure I could probably get that off if I really tried. But I have heard people saying that they have issues with masking, like they'll paint over badges or things like that. And so it seems like it's a bit dependent on your location. And speaking on that, one thing I want to note is that you have to give Maaco extremely detailed instructions, especially if you're particular about your car like I am. For example, I didn't want like this rear black bumper trim to be painted, so I had to be very specific about that. Even though, for example, when I dropped the car off to them, of course it was black beforehand, they just painted it blue, so I had to have them fix that. So I don't know if that's just the particular paint tech or the guy writing the estimate just didn't think to write that down or didn't use common sense. But my thought would be if something is black beforehand, it would remain black when it gets repainted. But that's one of those little things, some of those small attention to details that you might not necessarily get at all Maaco locations. Along with the car staying in the garage most of the time when it's not driven, I also do some maintenance on my paint as well to help it look still pretty good after these 4 years. I usually do a clay bar, hand wax, and hand polish 1 to 2 times a year. I do it by hand, and I was recommended this by Maaco and some other people. Because it's single stage, you don't have a clear coat on top that with an orbital buffer, you can kind of slowly eat away at that clear coat as you're buffing and polishing. Whereas with this, you start eating away at paint with that orbital buffer. That's all the paint there is. So I always do it by hand. It's a bit easier on the paint. It doesn't yield you the best results. The last time I did this was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And you can see it still looks really good. It still has a little bit of a smooth finish to it. Not as smooth as when I first did it. Again, if I used an actual buffer, I'm sure it would still have that very smooth finish to it. But that's really all the maintenance I do. Of course, try to wash it regularly, but that doesn't always happen. I want to next talk about the biggest con and problem I've had with Maaco over the 4 years of the body work, and that is body damage and body work. So basically, I had a huge dent on the bottom of my door here that I had Maaco fix. So they did a good job, at least I thought initially when they repaired the car. And after about a year and a half or 2 years, I'll put a photo on the screen, but it started to crack a little bit. The Bondo that they used to fill it just started to kind of crack. I don't know if water got in there or what, and it slowly got worse over time. Now I knew eventually I was going to get this aero kit for it, and I was going to have that painted, and I had a little bit of a scratch on the rear bumper that was my own fault that I also wanted to get fixed. So I was just waiting until I had all of that in order to get this fixed. And I was very disappointed that when I went to Maaco to get estimates, they pretty much told me that since it's been more than 2 years, you're on your own and you have to pay to have that fixed. So that is something to be very wary of. Not only does the paint itself have a prorated warranty, again, it depends on what level of paint you get. This particular paint had the 4-year prorated warranty, but also bodywork. They said all their bodywork has a 2-year prorated warranty. So it's been about 6 months since I got this aero side skirts and the whole rear bumper and some other little bodywork and blending fixed. I paid about $1,700 for all of that. So all in all, I'm over $3K into paint on this car. So looking back, I mean, I probably could have spent $3K and got a nicer paint job from somewhere else, but because they were split into 2 separate big jobs, I don't think that's necessarily fair. That is definitely the biggest con. So needless to say, I'm going to be keeping a close eye on how this bodywork kind of ages over time. And as soon as I start to see anything, I'm going to talk to Maaco about it to at least hopefully get them to cover some of it, if not all of it. Before we continue, quick shout out to our Saab Club of Arizona meet, which will be happening on November 9th, 2024, IMM Auto Service. If you're interested in learning more about it, you can join our Facebook page or DM me for more information. We'll be having giveaways, awards, Saab Club of Arizona and Saab Club of North America swag, some swag from some random brands, and more. It's going to be awesome. We always have people from out of state attend, so I hope to see some of you there. But when you take your car to Maaco, you also, like I touched on earlier, need to be very clear about your instructions, because when I did have this bumper repainted, I went to pick it up. I was so excited. This rear bumper trim was painted black. Now I did tell them very specifically, make sure to paint this part of the rear valence black, but I would have thought because the bumper I took off was blue and black, that they would have just used common sense to figure that out. They didn't. I had to basically wait another 3 or 4 days to pick it up until they could fix that. So make sure you're very, very clear on if you have a car like this that has different colored trim or you want something painted a little bit differently, please make sure you're very, very clear about that, because they might not necessarily, again, have that attention to detail. The other thing, make sure you do as much prep as you can by yourself. When I initially took this car to Maaco to have it painted, I swapped out the front bumper for this one. My old bumper had some broken tabs and stuff, so I got a new bumper at the junkyard, and I basically took the bumper off as well as the hood off, because the hood was going to be repainted. It was a different color as well because my old hood had a dent. And I took that off because now when I remove my bumper, like all these little cracks in here are all painted blue because it was removed for the car. Whereas obviously Maaco does their masking, but they're not going to be painting door jambs. For example, you can see the side skirt is painted blue, but there's the original midnight blue right there. So a little bit of a difference, again, just age and paint, of course. That's something to be wary of as well. If you can do the prep, I mean, some people even go as far as doing all the sanding and everything. They'll remove like lights, pretty much everything, almost just give them a shell and say, hey, paint this. But if you're going to go to that much work, you might as well just take it somewhere else to get it painted, in my opinion. But I would say if there's any little things like that on your car, do that prep work yourself beforehand. I would also say make sure you read reviews of Maacos online, because in Phoenix here, there's got to be at least a dozen Maacos around the valley. And so I went on, I looked at which Maacos sort of had the better reviews. I also got estimates from multiple Maacos. I asked them specifically, like when I got this bumper repainted, I was like, are you guys gonna blend it to the quarter panel? And the one guy at one Maaco was like, nah, it'll look fine. It's, you know, that paint's still pretty new. And then the other Maaco's like, yeah, we're gonna blend it. So obviously I went with that Maaco because even though that paint was 3 years old, brand new paint versus 3-year-old paint, I mean, anyone knows that it's not gonna look identical. And of course it didn't. So I had them blend it, and now you can't even tell that the bumper was repainted, and this is still the original, at least 4-year-old paint. But overall, would I recommend Maaco? I would say if you are on a budget and you just want your car to look better, go for it. Like I said, do all your research, do all that due diligence and everything that I mentioned throughout the video. If you have the money though, and you're willing to invest that money into the car, especially if it's a car you're gonna keep a long time, I would say find an actual paint shop. Not that Maaco is an actual paint shop, but find an actual paint shop that's going to do the multiple stage paint, give you a good base coat, maybe even a primer, and then especially a clear coat. I really wish this car had a separate clear coat on it. It's going to cost you more, but it's going to be easier to sort of maintain the paint, and you're also going to have less worry about how it's going to age over time. So looking back, again, this car looks awesome from 10 feet. And honestly, as you saw earlier, it looks great up close too. And so I would say I'm still happy with how this car looks after 4 years. If you told me 4 years ago the car would still look this good, I would have taken it 10 out of 10 times. So again, your maintenance on the paint, of course, seeing if you can park it out of the sun or just inside in general is also going to be a huge help. Regular washes, I honestly almost never wash this car. It's very disappointing. But these are all little things that you can do after you get your car painted, regardless of if it's Maaco or not, to help preserve that paint and your investment, because you spent thousands of dollars on your car to have it look good. If you aren't currently subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing. Help me reach my goal of 100,000, hopefully sooner rather than later. We're almost there, less than 5,000 away now. If you have any advice or comments, if you're also a person on the fence about Maaco or you've gotten a Maaco job, leave your thoughts down below in the comments as well. As always, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. I'll see you in the next one.